The Vampire of Wingartentrieba by Art Gaines. Chapter 4. At the mouth of the cave, the goblins slowly mustered. The goblin trumpet was spent, and someone had kicked it away down the mountainside. The calamitous and thunderous passing of the night had thrown their wits into arrears, and none were quite certain what had happened, nor how many enemies had assailed them. All they knew was that their lord and master was under attack. The vampire had not tipped them off regarding the presence of the Christian knight, lest they foil the trap he was setting. Gathering at the mouth of the cave, they peered back into its depths. They heard the chanting of a spell and the hollering of a human voice. Then there was a great flash of light that lit the entire length of the tunnel that led back to the throne room. The chanting immediately ended, broken by a vulgar exclamation of pain, then cursing and shouts of rage. A second flash followed the first, then a third, then a fourth. The goblins could not see from whence the flashes came, whether from sorcerous blasts or some other origin, but the light struck them with terror. That was a light brighter than almost any sorcery could emit. A fifth flash of light blazed forth from the end of the tunnel, brighter than the others. Immediately, a small, roundish object that looked an awful lot like a vampire's head flew into view and bounced upon the floor, rolling to a halt. The muscles and arteries of the severed neck glowed faintly for a moment, where the cold steel of Sir Allan's blade had touched them. Then they grew dim. Silence followed, filling the goblin horde with terror. A handful turned tail and fled immediately. A few of the bolder sort held their ground and took a few halting steps forward, wondering if perhaps it might be worthwhile to investigate. Perhaps the human knight had been grievously injured before dealing that fatal blow to their vampire lord, and perhaps might be easily dispatched with a few quick thrusts with a dagger. After a moment, though, the goblins paused in their forward progress. As a sound reached their ears, a number of sharp metallic sounds, the sound of chains being broken. After another moment, they dimly became aware of a shape approaching out of the darkness. Their eyes were still accustomed to the daylight outside the cave, and they strained to see. As the figure approached, it gradually resolved into view, and the hearts of the remaining goblins utterly melted in dismay. It was the great and terrible shape of Sir Allan approaching out of the darkness. In his arms he carried the white and wraith-like shape of the farmer's daughter, wrapped in his great dark cloak. She was awake, but her head bobbed in a dazed manner as she blinked both enchantments and clouding illusions from her eyes. So great was the terror that descended upon the goblins that a mere human, if human he was, could have defeated their sorceress and vampire lord, that not a few of them fell down as if dead, while the others tripped over each other in their haste to escape, fleeing though no one pursued them. Sir Allan stepped out of the cave and immediately proceeded down the mountain with the girl in his arms. With warm sunlight in her face, the girl came fully awake and ceased to blink in such a daze. She did not speak, but looked around in a distressed manner, her eyes flittering from Sir Allan's face to the trees they passed, to the rocks, and the blue sky above. She had some conception of what had just occurred, but the vampire had filled her head with so many lying visions that she was having difficulty discerning how much of what she remembered was real. She distinctly remembered what might have been a dream involving a delicious hunt for human victims. Part of her was still palpitating, remembering the intoxicating thrill of the hunt. It was not a true memory, of course, but she could not be certain. The stern but kindly face of Sir Allan served to be something of a touchstone for her, however. The knight's face had nothing of the ethereal and unblemished beauty of the vampire's cold visage, which was imprinted indelibly upon her mind's eye. But something told her it was better to focus on the scarred and ruddy face of the still-living knight who carried her, whose warmth she could feel flowing into her. With great difficulty, she drove the vampire's visage away. Her mind was at war with itself. Due to the poisons that still churned within her, the greater part of her still yearned for the vampire's embrace, and the dark adventure he had promised. Yet another part of her yearned for daylight and the comforting presence of her parents and brother, for simple and familiar human companionship. Sir Allan sensed the girl's wide eyes studying him as he carried her down the mountain and into the foothills, and he tried to make his expression as friendly as possible. He was fairly certain the vampire's servants had all fled in a wild panic, and there was little fear that any of them might seek revenge, but he made as much haste as he could, and kept an eye out for potential threats regardless. The girl was as light as a feather bolster in his arms. When they reached the foothills, he perceived that despite the warm sun on her face, the air was still intemperate, and the girl was freezing. She barely had the strength to hold the knight's cloak closed around her, and her bare feet were dangling in the air, exposed to the wind. Judging that it was safe to take a rest, Sir Allan stopped at a spot in a hollow between two foothills where a clean black stream flowed. The sun had melted a patch of snow next to the stream, exposing lush green grass beneath, which seemed to just be in the process of springing back to life. He placed the girl down gently on the trunk of a fallen tree so that her feet rested in the grass. Steadying her, he asked, "Can you hold yourself upright?" She nodded weakly, then cast her gaze down and attempted to pull the knight's cloak more tightly around herself. The grass was still quite cold and wet, and she kept trying to lift her feet out of it, but this resulted in her almost falling over. She looked quite miserable and frail. Her toes were beginning to turn blue. Sir Allan studied her for a moment to determine if she had taken any hurt. Her bare skin, wherever it was visible, was covered in reddish, sorcerous writing and sigils, probably spells and enthrallments of some sort, painted there by the vampire as part of his dark process. She was emaciated as well. Her thighs were barely any thicker than her ankles, though Sir Allan surmised she had probably been thin and wraith-like even before the vampire took her. One of the illusions the vampire had no doubt given her was of herself full-figured and curvaceous. "I'll build a fire," Sir Allan announced, but the girl was far too miserable to give any sign that she heard. As he collected firewood, it occurred to him that he should probably feed the girl as well, but all he had in his pack was hardtack and whey bread, which he doubted the girl would be able to get down in her weakened state. The vampire had undoubtedly fed her, but certainly not with anything wholesome, and certainly laced with enchantments. Then, by providence, Sir Allan looked up to see a rabbit not too far away, nibbling on another patch of exposed grass, its white winter fur setting it apart starkly from the dark undergrowth. Calmly, Sir Allan carried the firewood he had collected over to the girl where he had left his pack. Gently laying the firewood on the ground, he retrieved his one-handed crossbow, set the drawstring, and loaded a bolt. This rabbit was no fey creature, but an ordinary animal such as could be found on Earth or the Old World. If startled, it would flee. Still shivering, the girl looked up at the knight curiously as he retrieved his weapon, but did not comment. Sir Allan sidled cautiously toward the rabbit, appearing to keep his attention elsewhere. Then, when he judged he was close enough to be sure of hitting his mark, he turned languidly, took aim, and released the bolt. The rabbit was pierced straight through the thorax. It thrashed for a moment, then lay still. Striding up to it, Sir Allan broke its neck for good measure, then tied it by the legs to his belt. After collecting a few more pieces of firewood, he returned to the girl and built a fire which quickly burst into flame by his practiced hand. The girl stared into the flames, rocking backwards and forwards in the attempt to ease her discomfort. Taking the rabbit carcass down to the stream, Sir Allan quickly skinned and disemboweled the animal. Then, taking a flat river stone as his cutting board, he cut the meat into manageable strips and deposited them, along with some stream water and some salt from his store, into a small orb-shaped cooking pot. Then he placed the pot directly in the fire. It was not an ideal manner in which to prepare a stew, but it was all he could manage in a pinch. Leaving the pot to boil, Sir Allan took a moment to stand and feel the sun on his face. The gentle caress of the heavenly orb was offset somewhat by the cold, brisk air, but Sir Allan appreciated both sensations. The sun seemed a bit smaller than it should be, but that did not diminish its warmth. The hair behind his ears was damp with sweat, and the cold felt refreshing. Here and there he felt a few dull aches and pains which he had not yet taken the time to investigate. Removing his gauntlets and rolling back his sleeves, he found several small abrasions that required attention. He washed them as best he could with stream water, applied a salve he carried in a small wooden box, then bandaged the injuries. Allan turned to look at the girl again. She was still shivering, but had regained enough strength to look up at him with shaky movements. She could not hold his gaze, however, and quickly looked away. In truth, the shame of her predicament was beginning to impress itself upon her mind. She had fallen for a night creature's enchantments, a very creature of the devil whose wickedness she had heard excoriated in 100 homilies and prayers, the very enemy of mankind, whose enmity against those who are called by Christ's name knows no limit. Sir Allan sensed something of this as he took a seat on the log next to her. Gently putting a hand behind her head, he turned her to face him and began to clean the sorceress writing and sigils from her face with a cloth dampened with stream water. Still, she could not meet his gaze. When he had finished with her face, he turned her head away to clean the markings from her neck. Then finally, the girl spoke. "You should have left me there with him. I would have been beautiful and strong." Turning her head again to face him, he commanded her, "Look at me." The girl obeyed and momentarily locked eyes with him. She tried looking away, but Sir Allan sternly made her look back again. Allan studied her eyes closely, searching to see if there was anything more in them than all too human dejection and discomfort, some lingering trace of a real demonic presence, or the incursions of some alien spirit. Satisfying himself, he pursed his lips and shook his head. Then he turned her face away again to continue cleaning her neck. All he saw in her eyes was misery and shame and hopelessness. He knew better than to take too seriously what people say when they are cold, hungry, in poor health, and tired. The girl was still shivering. "I was warm with him," the girl muttered. Sir Allan sighed, then spoke gently. "You speak foolishness, girl. That stone you were chained to was cold as death. If you'd remained with him much longer, you would soon have never felt real human warmth again in your flesh, except for the briefest illusory moments when you slaked your terrible thirst for it in the blood of your victims." The girl began to shake her head, her thoughts warring with each other. No doubt she was thinking that she would never recover from the shame of what she had endured. She began to weep. "There is nothing wrong with you," Sir Allan declared, vigorously wiping the last of the markings from the girl's neck. "That warm toes and a bellyful of rabbit won't fix." He almost added, "and a short visit with your priest," but that went without saying. Sir Allan got up to check on the stew, and the girl pulled the cloak more tightly around herself. When the stew was ready, Sir Allan poured a bit of it into a wooden bowl for her and handed her a spoon. At first, she did not seem to care for it, but after a few mouthfuls, she suddenly became much more animated and eagerly began gulping it down. After she had emptied the bowl by tipping the last few dregs of its contents into her mouth, Sir Allan refilled it with what was left in the pot, which she then consumed with relish. Allan stood as she ate, contenting himself with a bit of hardtack. The sky above was a brilliant, clear blue, unmarred by a single cloud. Enough of spring was in the air that occasionally a bit of birdsong could be heard. After draining her second bowl, the girl looked up at the night and asked, "Is there any more?" Sir Allan shook his head but handed her a piece of leather-like whey bread. It was tough, and she had to tear at it with her teeth and yank at it with her hands. After she had successfully ripped a piece off, she sat and munched on it laboriously. Placing a hand on the log to steady herself, she lifted her feet and began to wriggle her toes before the fire. Color had already begun to come back into them. The knight nodded to himself, glad to see some spirit returning to the girl. Looking at her bare legs, Sir Allan surmised that she was bound to get very cold again very quickly the moment they left the fire, since she did not have any proper clothes. Then a solution came to him. Picking up the rabbit pelt, he carefully cut it into 2 roughly equal portions, both large enough to wrap around the girl's feet. Then he retrieved some strips of cloth from his pack and knelt next to the girl. "You're going to need some footwear," he explained. The girl obediently lifted a foot for him and rested it on his knee. Placing one piece of rabbit pelt against the sole of her foot, fur side inside, he fixed it in place by wrapping her foot and ankle with a strip of cloth and then tying it off. When that was done, he did the same for her other foot. He stood, "There, those won't be much good for walking, but they'll keep your feet warm for a little bit." Sir Allan rapidly packed up all his things, slung his pack over his shoulders, then swiftly caught the girl up in his arms. "Oh!" she exclaimed, surprised. "My horse isn't too far away, I hope," Sir Allan explained. "You should be back with your family before the sun begins to set." As he strode along with the farm girl in his arms, Sir Allan began to sing softly to himself. He started with a Latin psalm, then one in French, then one in Gaelic. After a while, he looked down at the girl's face and saw that she had fallen fast asleep. Allan nodded to himself and continued to sing softly, this time in a combination of Gaelic and French. You would have been surprised to hear such a pleasant voice coming from such a rugged-looking man. "Unto the hills I lift my longing eyes. Whence comes my aid? My help is from the Lord, the one who heaven and earth has made. Your foot from stumbling he will ever keep. He who preserves your life will never sleep. He who keeps Israel slumbers not, nor sleeps by night or day. The Lord keeps you. A shade on your right hand the Lord will stay. Throughout the day the sun shall never smite. No moon shall harm you in the hours of night. The Lord himself will your protector be from every ill. From every evil he will keep your soul securely still. Your daily going out and in your door. The Lord will keep both now and evermore. Sir Allan found his horse right where he had left it. It had consumed a great deal of the turf before it, and the lead was barely still attached to the branch Sir Allan had affixed it to, but the animal had remained where it was, faithfully awaiting the return of its master. Allan had to wake the girl to set her down upon her own 2 feet. He slapped the horse's neck affectionately a few times. "There's a good horse. What a faithful servant you are." The horse pranced a bit and stamped impatiently. Throwing his boot up into the stirrup, the knight leapt up into the saddle, and the horse immediately began to move. With some difficulty, Sir Allan redirected it back toward the girl and held his hand out for her as he passed. She lifted her arm. Sir Allan grasped it and pulled her up to join him on the horse's back so that she sat sideways. She exclaimed once again as she was lifted, "You're very strong." The knight laughed. "You're very light." The horse began to sidestep and turn in circles. Sir Allan addressed it like a man. "We have places to be, my friend. You can stretch out the kinks in your legs on the road." As if it understood human speech, the horse seemed to center itself, and Sir Allan spurred it onward, toward the farm from which the girl had been stolen. After shifting around a bit for her own comfort, the girl fell fast asleep again, despite the jostling of the horse's movement.